Hello everyone. In this video, I will show the plot of the game Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber. This game is the direct sequel to the Ogre Battle The March of the Black Queen story, so I'll leave the story video above for you to check out and remember. A lot is officially vague and left to interpretation, so I made the script more simplified for understanding. There's no new game that continues the story after this one, so there's no way to say at the moment what the correct ending is, so I'll be using information from the path that leads to lawful ending with the addition of a specific chaos ending scene that complements it. I consider that this path most fits with the events and characters shown in the game. If you are a fan of the Ogre Battle saga, subscribe to the channel and give a like to the video, so YouTube can present this amazing universe to more people around the world. Are you ready? Let's go! At the beginning, the creation. According to legends, in the beginning a superior god created all things. He became known as Great Father Philaha and created various races, environments, climates, and three main kingdoms. The Kingdom of Heaven, where Philaha and her holy servants would live, like angels and lesser gods. Below them would live some creatures and humans, the preferred creation and made in the likeness of the superior god, in the earth realm. And finally, below them, the underworld, a land inhabited by chaotic and very powerful creatures like ogres and also home to evil gods. What would allow the connection and movement between these three realms would be the so-called Chaos Gates, magical portals distributed around the realms. To establish the planet, Philaha generated 4 main elemental goddesses and sent them there, these being Harnella, goddess of air; Bert, goddess of earth; Zashanel, goddess of fire; and Gruza, goddess of water. In this scenario, humans emerged across the land, developing and creating kingdoms. In one of these kingdoms, located on the continent of Galius, the earth goddess Bert ends up meeting the human king of the place and both fall in love. Their love gives birth to a child named Danica. As a demigoddess, Danica inherited the power of fertility, which she used to bless her father's lands, making them very fertile and leading the kingdom to much prosperity. Everything was going well until Damunza, the god of the underworld and darkness, appears to Danica. He seduces her with his powers and abducts her to the underworld. Bert and the king were very sad, and after the grief, they decide to get their daughter back. Bert uses her powers to open one of the Chaos Gates to the underworld, and they both head there. They meet Damunza, who proposes a deal. He would return Danica if Bert uses her powers to bless the underworld lands with her grace. With no other choice, the goddess agrees and offers her blessing to the cursed lands, returning along with the king and his daughter to the mainland. What they would discover upon arrival is that Danica had been forced to eat a cursed underworld fruit while she was there. This fruit has the power to awaken the evil and chaotic side of a being, as the ogres and residents of that realm possessed. Danica would now have 2 personalities, a good one, from her divine heritage, and an evil one, awakened in the underworld due to her human heritage. When her evil side awakened after eating the fruit, she accepted Damunza's proposal to become the queen of that kingdom alongside him. Sad for their daughter, the goddess and the king decided to take action to avoid this cruel fate. Danica couldn't go to heaven now that she was part ogre, so she is put to sleep and her body is divided into 5 parts. Her soul and her torso are confined to the depths of the earth, and her four limbs become four powerful beings known as Knights of Danica to protect her existence from any evil being that tries to resurrect her. The goddess Bert then says goodbye and returns to the skies. The king builds a temple in Bert's name at the exact spot they went to the underworld and where she returned to the heavens so that someday she might return. Knowledge of the existence of this temple would be limited only to the king and the highest-ranking priest who worshiped Bert. Meanwhile, in the underworld, the dark god Demunza took advantage of the goddess Bert's blessing on the cursed soil to grow, assembling a giant army of chaotic creatures to march on the overworld and take control for himself. He chooses Diablo, the god of destruction, as his general, and he initiates the invasion through the Chaos Gates. His army of monsters and demons was far more powerful than humans, equaling even the gods. The reason underworld dwellers are more powerful is that they possess the infernal aura. Okay, so, the infernal aura. This is a very important concept here, and it alludes to the Star Wars movie Saga. The infernal aura is basically the dark side of the Force. He makes you more powerful, but you become mad and violent, seduced by your desires, and devoted to darkness. When Great Father Philaha created humans, he made them with infinite capacity, but to prevent them from going down the path of darkness to become stronger and pursue their individual goals, he imposed a seal to protect them. However, emotional and mental instability combined with a weak willpower to stay on the path of good can cause humans to break the seal and become ogres. So during Diablo's invasion, many humans were killed, but others were also corrupted by the fear and dark magic of the underworld inhabitants and ended up succumbing to darkness, becoming violent or even mutating into ogres and attacking the human race. This kind of event gave even more advantage to the cursed army, which advanced through the regions easily. The extinction of humans and domination by the underworld was a matter of time. To protect humans, the gods above decide to intervene. In the last battle for the human race, an army of angels is sent from the heavens to the battlefield, along with 3 legendary knights from ages past and 12 mighty sages with divine powers. Furthermore, one of the lesser gods identified on a continent far south of the battlefield some exceptional humans called Balmokans. They are dark-skinned, with long, muscular arms and legs. Admired by their strength and ferocity in battle, this god used their powers to bring them to the battlefield as reinforcements against the ogres. And so would begin the war of the last humans and divine beings against the ogres and their cursed army. This event became known as the Ogre Battle. Sometime later, Reconstruction and the Covenant. After several long and difficult battles, the humans allied with the powers of the divine armies managed to defeat Diablo and a large amount of his army, sending them back to the underworld and sealing the Chaos Gates to prevent further invasions. With the threat of the ogres defeated, humans were now able to develop and travel to various parts of the world. Returning to this region of the continent of Galeus, the Balmokans settled on the west coast and founded the Kingdom of Nildum. To the south, the Southerners settled. This territory was unproductive for agriculture because of the soil, so they had to develop a strong community spirit along with a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to survive. In the center, extremely fertile lands were concentrated. This space became known as the Heartlands and was inhabited by a people called Oryx, a peaceful tribe of farmers and ranchers who praised the goddess Bert because of the fertility of the land and the blessings in their lives. To the west of there settled the people called Indigans, a tribe of nomadic hunters and warriors characterized by the blue color of their eyes and hair. The Indigans decide to invade to take control of the fertile lands of the center, and as they are much more experienced in battle, they manage to dominate the region, driving the Oryx to the mountainous, icy, and inhospitable region of the east. Seeing the suffering of his people in this situation, an Orc named Virago del Mare is furious and asks for help to face his enemies and regain his land. He ends up finding Bert's temple and the Knights of Dinica who were there. Dinica's soul that was in the depths of the earth hears the desperate cries of the young warrior, and this awakens her evil personality with the evil feelings of hatred and revenge that emanated. Dinica offers a covenant to Virago. She would give him her powers, but in return her bloodline would at some point provide a son as a vessel so she could resurrect and assume her post as queen of the underworld. Virago accepts the pact and comes to be known as the progenitor. With his new God-given powers, he sends frigid winds and the fury of the earth against the Indigans, who try to fight, but as they suffer great losses, they are forced to surrender and bow to him. The progenitor becomes the new king of both the Auric people and the Indigan people and declares the creation of the kingdom that would encompass both territories, the kingdom of Palatinus, with the Aurics as the nobility and the progenitor's heirs as the royal family generation after generation. Several decades later, violent Northwest air. During the period when the kingdom of Palatinus enjoyed stability and peace with the reign of the progenitor's heirs, other kingdoms appeared in other regions. On the same continent, to the northwest, the Holy Lodician Empire emerged. This empire was based on the religious dogma of Lodism, which preached that there was only one supreme god, named Filler, and that any other supposed gods worshipped in other religions around the world would be nothing more than avatars of Filler. So the worship of these avatars would be considered blasphemous and should be fought. Only true faith should exist. Initially, this dogma was restricted only to the region where the empire was located, but it didn't take long for their king to decide to expand this doctrine to other lands and gain more power. This campaign would become known as the Holy War and was initially supported by the clergy as a way of expanding the religion and by nobles and merchants as a way of acquiring wealth. Later, the participating knightly orders themselves began to support it as a test of pride and honor. One of these military orders was called the Collegianus Order and was commanded by Godfrey Glendale, gaining much prestige within the empire due to the advances of his campaigns. The empire was controlled by a king, but Sardian, the Pope, carries out a violent coup d'état along with the Senate and becomes the supreme ruler of the empire. In the midst of this coup, Godfrey Glendale is killed and the Collegianus Order is demoted in importance, losing much of its former prestige. Godfrey had two sons, Richard and Baldwin. Command of the order was left in Richard's hands as he seemed to have inherited his father's spirit of leadership and arrogance more than his brother. Pope Sardian then forms the Brigade of the Radiant Cross with several orders of knights, including the Collegianus Order, to begin domination of the regions beyond. The First Crusade sought to dominate the lands around the empire, succeeding. The Second Crusade consisted of marching southeast, down the mountains, and with that they ended up reaching the kingdom of Nildum and meeting the Balmacans, who, due to their superhuman abilities, offered a lot of resistance and struggle against the Order's armies. The king of Nildum fought on the front line along with the other Balmacans, but in one of the conflicts he was wounded and had to retreat. The two princes were expected to be replacements on the front lines, but the two began to argue whether they should face Lodis or not. One of them wanted to surrender and another to fight. This caused a rift in the kingdom, with the Balmacans fighting each other following the will of one prince or another. In this state of internal chaos, Lodi's manages to advance and subjugate the region. Normally, when Lodi's dominates a region, he imposes his doctrine and only controls the decisions that the region's kingdom makes according to his interests, but with Nildum it would be different. As they had offered much resistance to the Empire due to their physical ability, the entire royal family was imprisoned and all Balmokans became slaves, forced to work. And so, with control of the region, the Second Crusade of the Brigade of the Radiant Cross was successful. The Third Crusade would then seek to go east of Nildum. The Knights of Lodi's then arrive at the kingdom of Palatinus. The king at the time was Procus Dulmare, who upon learning of the situation that Lodi's imposed on his Balmokan's neighbors, decided not to offer resistance to domination and surrendered after a few battles. Despite regretting this, King Procus entered into an agreement with Lodi's in which he could retain his title and some autonomy in the region, as long as he followed the empire's orders as its puppet. And so the king begins to impose the religion of Lodi's on the people as ordered by the empire, having great resistance from the eastern region, where the church devoted to the goddess Bert was located. In addition to the imposition of religion, Lodi's imposed that a class system be established, where the upper class would be formed by the nobles and merchants who would gain benefits and the lower class by the common population, who would receive no benefit and just oppression. Lodi's then had control of the east, west, and central region of the kingdom of Palatinus. The central region was settled with the high-class nobles, to the east the religious of Bertha, and to the west the Balmokan slaves. South was missing. Lodi's then orders King Procus to dominate the southern region and integrate it into the kingdom. The southern peoples who were independent until now offer resistance to incomparability, and so they are condemned to be low-class citizens and to be oppressed by the upper classes. With the success of the campaign of the now completed kingdom of Palatinus, the Third Crusade was complete and the knightly orders of Lodi's returned to the empire's capital to report their conquests. With the success of the expeditions, Pope Sardian gained even more prestige and decided to form 16 special legions of elite warriors as his personal guard that he could use for secret missions such as espionage, assassinations, or seek powerful artifacts to further expand his power. For success in Palatinus, one of these ranks is given to the Collegianus Order under the leadership of Richard Glendale, now known as Richard the Dragonheart. Here we will jump forward a few years into the future. In between that period, some important events will happen. Southern Palatinus is immediately connected to the continent of Zytogenia. On this continent, the sacred Zytogenian Empire led by Empress Endora and sage Rashidi will be formed. Rashidi begins studying dark magic to seek more power and makes contact with the underworld, forming a pact with Diablo to resurrect him and bring the ogres back to Earth. Diablo tells Rashidi about the story of the underworld queen who was imprisoned in the world of men to the north, so Rashidi creates a plan B in case his plan to resurrect Diablo doesn't work out and he dies. Rashidi uses her magic to influence the soul of the goddess Danica in the depths to awaken and activate the covenant made with the progenitor, thus incarnating her soul in the body of a baby of the royal family of Palatinus. Rashidi then has a daughter with someone and uses her dark magic to bewitch the child to fall in love and connect with the child who would have Danica's soul. He names the child Mari Callan and gives her to Zeta Liberero, a servant of the underworld. Zeta then goes north and takes the child with her. After a few years, the sacred Zytogenian Empire is defeated, and Dora and Rashidi are killed by the Liberation Army under the command of Destin Ferota and Prince Tristan Zenobia. Tristan becomes king and in place of the empire creates the kingdom of New Zenobia. Upon learning of Lodi's advances across the world, Destin Ferota and 4 other rebellion warriors head to northern Zenobia to investigate this threat. During this period, Lodi's also learns about a formidable power present on an island south of the continent of Gallius called Valyria. That power would involve Chaos Gates, so Pope Sardian sends one of his private legions in secret to Zenobia to steal one of the kingdom's mythical treasures, the sword Brynhild, which has the power to break any seal. The Dark Knights of Lodi's end up clashing with the Holy Knights of Zenobia on the spot, but end up managing to steal the object and travel to Valyria. Zenobia sends some of her best soldiers secretly after them to retrieve the object, and when they arrive on the island, what happens is... Wait! Wrong story! Sorry. Back to Palatinus. A rebellion will arise led by Bist Laverit. Central Division warriors like Sir Ankaseth Gallant, Asnabel Burall, and Hugo Miller manage to put down the rebellion and arrest Bist. Asnabel ends up being arrested and forced to work later when he rebels against the caste system imposed by Lodi's. King Procus will have two sons here. The first is called Amrius Delmare. The second child, named Eumel Delmare, is born, but he is born with silver hair, unlike the blonde ones of his parents and brother, and at birth he ends up taking his mother's life. These events make her father, King Procus, go crazy and have a lot of distrust and hatred of him. Ankaseth is assigned as the boy's bodyguard, and he leaves his son and our protagonist, Magnus, who was the same age, with him to play. Eumel and Magnus grow up together as best friends. Eumel is kind and fragile, while Magnus is strong and lively. When the boys were 12 years old and were playing around the castle, a member of the nobility takes out a sword and points it at Eumel in order to kill him. Magnus tries to stop him but is knocked down. At this moment, Ankaseth appears and kills the noble, protecting the boys. Ankaseth knew that the assassination plan had been commissioned by King Procus against his own son, but seeing the situation he was in, he decided to accept the nickname of assassin and disgrace the kingdom, being demoted from his post and sent to the Division of the West. Magnus, who witnessed everything, is disgusted by his father accepting the disgrace and for not being able to protect his friend, so he says goodbye to Eumel and enters the military academy, studying and learning how to become a strong warrior. And it's here, at Magnus' graduation from the military academy, that the game will begin. "6 years later. Person of lordly caliber. The kingdom of Palatinus is divided into 4 regions. Lodi's orders the Palatinus region to become a military dictatorship ruled by generals in its 4 main regions: Latium, Capitrium, Wintinus, and Alba, or also called Central, Eastern, Western, and Southern regions respectively, for better control. King Procus rules the entire kingdom along with his son Amrius in the central region, where the most fertile lands and nobles were. The southern region is ruled by General Godeslas Branick and is home to the lower class, with infertile land and work in the ore mines, being the least prestigious region. The western region is ruled by General Ankaseth, where in addition to the residents, they have the Balmawkins people in a slavery regime working in the local mines. The eastern region is commanded by Archbishop Odoron Balaam and is also called the Eastern Orthodox Church, as the residents of the region did not stop worshipping the goddess Berg, even with the imposition of Lodi's. All regions responded to the orders given by King Procus, who despite having some autonomy, had to fulfill the orders given directly by the Holy Lodi's Empire. The king was very angry at being subjugated by Lodi's, so he and his eldest son decide to search in secret for the power of the progenitor that was told in the legends to get revenge. Seeing Lodi's advances on Palatinus, Zeta decides to start her plans and goes to the Empire to tell them about Bert's infinite power sealed in Palatinus and how they could gain access to it. She also gives them some underworld fruits, which when eaten would awaken the true power of humans, as proof of trust, and also delivers Mari as a woman worthy to take care of a prince's needs. Lodi's then sends Baldwin Glendale to investigate and look for ways to gain that power for the Empire on Palatinus, taking Mari with him. Magnus graduates from the military academy and is sent along with other graduates to the Southern Division to train. Arriving there, he introduces himself to his commander, General Godeslas, responsible for the governance of that region. Candidates are taken for an interview with the Armada advisor. The counselor is Hugo, who recognizes the boy as Ankaseth's son. Another graduate comes in to be evaluated. His name is Diomedes Rang, better known as Dio, who has a more combative and explosive personality. Hugo decides to give the temporary leadership of the troop in training to Magnus. This ends up infuriating Dio, who refuses to follow anyone weaker than him and challenges Magnus to combat. Magnus rejects the provocation and they head off to training. Magnus commands the units and they clear the region of some wild animals, but they end up encountering some bandits on the way who seem to be up to something. The bandits are confronted and defeated, claiming to be in favor of the revolution against the oppression of their people. Magnus tries to get more information, but is interrupted when Dio appears and says that Prince Humul had been attacked nearby. Hugo says there's no time to go back to main command to ask for backup, so Magnus decides to go after his friend. Magnus commands his troops to search the region, and he ends up finding the bandits who were holding the prince and his guard hostage. After a battle, the bandits are defeated and retreat. Along with Humul were two officers from the central region as his guard. One is called Urinom Raid, a very arrogant knight who abuses his high-class position to humiliate the lower class whenever he can, and the other is called Gil Varit, a powerful knight who is very violent against enemies of the kingdom. Raid orders Magnus to eliminate all the rebels that were in the region. Magnus questions whether a massacre is really necessary, but Raid says the rebels want the kingdom to end and only severe punishment would stop them. Humul is apprehensive about Raid's attitude and Magnus left to fulfill what was ordered. Magnus arrives where the rest of the rebels were and begs them to surrender peacefully as he doesn't want to kill them. The rebel leader at the scene responds by saying that they have already given their lives to the revolution and that they would create a world without a caste system where everyone would have equal rights and they would no longer be oppressed. The rebels are defeated and Magnus decides to arrest them rather than kill as ordered. Humul and his two knights arrive, and when the prince goes to thank him for being rescued, Raid interrupts him and furiously questions why the rebels are trapped and not killed. Magnus replies that he thinks it would be interesting for the kingdom to hear their complaints, but Raid humiliates them by saying that the lower classes complain about everything because they only care about themselves. The rebels respond by saying that it is the upper class who only think about themselves, using their power, influence, and alliance with Lodi's to oppress them as if they were animals. Raid says that they, the nobles, dedicate their lives to the peace and prosperity of the kingdom and prepares his sword to kill the rebels right there. Magnus puts himself in front of the rebels and says the prince doesn't want a bloodbath. Raid says he doesn't mind, as Humul is very merciful, so he should learn how the world works and how those who challenge the higher classes should be treated, taking down Magnus and preparing his attack. Raid's sword is interrupted at that moment by another sword from a guy with blonde hair. While Raid is distracted, a woman appears and frees the rebels. At that moment, Gil decides to attack but is interrupted by another hooded warrior. A mage appears and paralyzes everyone there with his magic. When they return to normal, all the rebels have fled along with these mysterious warriors. News of the attack on the prince spreads throughout the region, and in order not to be humiliated for letting the rebels escape, the Southern Division decides to accuse an innocent man of being the mastermind behind the entire revolution and execute him in the public square. This incident ends up having the opposite effect. The people become more angry at the injustice and join the rebellion, increasing attacks and violence against the kingdom's forces. Magnus returns to headquarters. General Godeslas makes him the official captain of his own battalion due to his results on the battlefield so far, even though he made the mistake of showing mercy to the rebels. The general orders Magnus to go to one of their bases to the south to defeat them, abandon his personal feelings and principles, and just follow orders from now on. Alongside Magnus' battalion, the troops of Leia Silvis, a determined warrior, are immediately integrated. Leia is the daughter of a northern nobleman, but decides to join the army to stand on her own 2 feet, even against her father's wishes. Her strong personality soon clashes with Dio, but they both stop bickering when Hugo arrives to explain battlefield strategy. This battalion, commanded by Magnus and with Dio, Leia, and Hugo from now on, is called the Blue Knights. The Blue Knights arrive at the rebel base and find their commander there. She says that from now on they will be called the Palatinian Revolutionary Army and that they are led by a man named Sir Frederick Raskin. Magnus defeats his adversary and becomes thoughtful about the goals of this revolution. Hugo appears and says that new orders have been given to the battalion. They should first go to the border with Zenobia, where mysteriously rebels were seen marching south with civilians, trying not to attract attention. The Blue Knights come to them and are confronted by the blonde knight from before. His name is Debonair, a warrior of Zenobia, and who, along with Gilbert, were evaluating civilians who don't want to fight in this revolution to the kingdom of Zenobia. Magnus decides to fight but is interrupted when 3 other warriors appear. They are Aisha, Saradin, and Destin. Destin Ferota, the hero of Zenobia, questions whether Magnus would really follow orders to finish them off, as he had previously ignored orders and aided the rebels. The 5 warriors of Zenobia were watching the war in the kingdom and were helping the civilians, discovering that who controlled the kingdom was actually the Holy Lodi's empire. Magnus then accuses the Zenobians of instigating the rebellion and creating a war against Lodi's. They say that they just want to fix injustices peacefully, but that as people are very angry with this situation, some end up using violence and they lose control. Magnus is also confused, and he should find his own way to achieve his goals, regardless of the people around him. Magnus reflects on the meaning of those words as he watches the rebels walk away. Hugo appears and says his new orders are to escort Prince Yumel to the northwest, and so they march together. In one of the villages, Magnus is approached by a boy named Troy Titan, who asks to join the troop upon seeing the great power of the Blue Knights. They end up facing some Revolutionary Army warriors on the way, but end up making it to their destination. Yumel thanks Magnus for his help and asks why he didn't return to the central region after finishing the military academy. Magnus says that he wanted to know the world and himself, which was not possible with the lifestyle of the nobles in the capital. Yumel agrees, saying that he thought his father and brother ruled the kingdom with dignity, but seeing how much the other regions were oppressed and hated the nobles, he decided to change that. Yumel asks his friend to accompany him, become his knight, and lend his strength so that he can change the world, bringing peace and harmony. Magnus says he can't accompany him right now as he's confused about what's right and what's wrong and what he really should do. They are interrupted by a messenger, urgently demanding the Blue Knight's presence at the headquarters again. Magnus and the prince say their goodbyes and the battalion returns to headquarters. There, Magnus finds General Godeslas and also Knight Raid talking. Godeslas informs them that the rebels are advancing into a nearby region and that the leader of the rebellion, Frederick Raskin, was with them. Being a great opportunity to end him and the rebellion once and for all, Raid and his troop from the central region were also called in to assist, as Zenobia's knights were also seen with the rebels. Magnus travels to face the troops while Raid prepares his army to help. Shortly after their departure, another informant comes to the general and informs him that the rebels have taken over half of all the southern strongholds due to the betrayal of several soldiers within the army who supported the cause of the revolution. Godeslas is desperate and hopes that Magnus can finish off Frederick. The Blue Knights arrive at the scene and advance against the rebels, defeating their army. Magnus gets to Frederick and captures him. Frederick asks why he is discouraged, as he has done his duty. Magnus says he hates everything and everyone because he had only let others decide his life for him and he didn't know if capturing Frederick was even his will anymore. Godeslas and Raid appear, congratulating Magnus on the success of the campaign and telling Frederick to speak his last words. Frederick says his death will not be the end of the revolution. Another leader would emerge as the fight for freedom would not stop as long as the kingdom was corrupt. Raid calls the entire revolution worthless rubbish and orders Magnus to execute Frederick. When Magnus hesitates, Raid taunts him by saying that he is a traitor like his father and that refusing to follow orders would bring disgrace to his life. Raid moves forward to execute Frederick, but Magnus decides to act. He cuts Frederick's ropes and orders him to flee. Dio accepts Magnus' choice and stays behind to face Raid as they flee. They hide in a basement and Frederick thanks him for saving his life, even at the cost of now being chased across the kingdom. Dio also appears at the scene, injured but alive from the confrontation, along with the rest of the troop who decided to follow their commander's lead. Magnus thanks them for their support and asks Frederick to join the revolutionary army to seek freedom for the people. Frederick accepts, saying that everyone is welcome as long as they are willing to fight for the end of the caste system and for Palatinus independence from the Holy Lodi's empire. Now part of the Palatinus Revolutionary Army, Magnus and his battalion are ordered to conquer the remaining southern strongholds for the rebels and save a man who would be of great help to the group. In this first mission as a member of the rebels, Magnus, being much more skilled in military techniques than charisma and politics, sends his troop members culturally closer with the inhabitants of each village on the way to explain what they were trying to do and win support from the population. As in the eyes of the peaceful people, they were bringing war and death only so far. In one of these villages, they meet Katrina Baral, a cleric who decides to join the battalion in search of freeing her father who was being taken prisoner. Magnus arrives in the region and rescues Asnabel, a powerful warrior who was imprisoned and who is Katrina's father. The two join the revolutionary army together. Magnus meets with Destin, who congratulates him on being on their side now, and Hugo explains the upcoming operation. The Zenobians would advance against the southern headquarters while the Blue Knights would take control of the last remaining stronghold. At this time, General Godeslas is visited by the Knight of Lodi's Baldwin, who warns him that he will be punished for the advance of the rebel situation in the southern region. Baldwin offers a way to resolve this, and the general redeem himself, while secretly conducting an experiment. Baldwin introduces Godeslas to the fruit of the underworld, in which whoever eats it will become very powerful, just what the now weak army of the South needed. Godeslas then decides to sacrifice his family and soldiers in order to regain his prestige. He gives the fruits for them to eat, but they are consumed by the infernal aura of the underworld and end up becoming violent ogres and attacking the entire region in a chaotic way. Magnus' battalion arrives in the region and is forced to face these evil beings. After very difficult battles against these creatures, they manage to defeat a soldier who was possessed by the aura and who says that it was General Godeslas who forced them to eat the fruits. Was Palatinus deliberately using demons against the revolution? Destin appears and says he knows this evil aura and that these creatures were either coming from the underworld or people were succumbing to the way of darkness. They decide to head to the southern headquarters to settle this matter with Godeslas once and for all. The central region communicates that the spawning and slaughtering of monsters in the south has nothing to do with the central command of Palatinus. King Procus does this because he fears that this news could reach Lodi's and they would declare Palatinus as a pagan region that should be totally destroyed by the empire, ending their revenge plan. Magnus' battalion marches towards the southern capital as Destin and the Zenobians try to save the nearby regions from the invading ogres. After many wild ogre attacks along the way, they finally reach the general's castle. Seeing the troops approaching, Godeslas begs Baldwin for help. Baldwin blames this chaotic situation on Godeslas, who was too incompetent to resolve his situation from the start. Baldwin tricked Godeslas into using the fruits so that he could examine what would happen and what kind of power it would cause in people of little determination. Baldwin leaves and Godeslas is confronted by Magnus and his warriors. The general's despair and anger make his infernal fruit aura awaken, and he becomes extremely violent and powerful, being a major obstacle for the protagonists. After a difficult fight, Godeslas is finally defeated and killed. The revolutionaries had finally taken control of the entire southern region of the kingdom, and the lower classes' cheers were heard. With news of this victory spreading throughout the reign, Lodi's orders the king to completely eliminate all revolutionaries. The king then sends orders for the east and west divisions to mobilize to attack the rebels. Prince Eumel is placed as general of the troops of the west, and Ankaseth as their commander. Baldwin appears to celebrate the prince's new rank and brings him Mari to help with his personal needs as a gift. Mari and Eumel form a connection right away. The east, controlled by the Eastern Orthodox Church, although given the order to attack the south, remained stagnant without movement. The Revolutionary Army is informed that an entire legion of soldiers from the Western Regiment is marching to meet them and that the confrontation will be in a few days. Concerned about the current size of the revolution's troops to face such a large contingent, Ziveg Nulitan, Frederick's right-hand captain, recalls that as in the southern region, in the western region the Balmalkans are made of slaves, and that they could be a considerable force if their freedom were conditioned to attack their enemies by them. Unlike Frederick, who seeks to achieve peace through diplomacy, Ziveg as a warrior has no problem using violence to achieve the goals of the revolution. Hugo warns that releasing them would most certainly draw the attention of Lodi's, who could act directly, and Magnus is furious at the suggestion. The revolution wanted to end the class system and control of Lodi's, so the Balmalkans should be allies and not tools. Magnus asks to go free them and ask for their help. On the way to the mines, some soldiers of the Revolution rebel and faced the Blue Knights, as they did not agree with the peaceful way that Frederick was trying to solve things, and that now that the rebels were winning battles, they wanted to use force to keep advancing and not more diplomacy. Magnus defeats them and continues to march west. Meanwhile, Raid makes his way to the western headquarters and offers Hummel reinforcements to face the southern rebels. Raid's reinforcements consisted of Balmakan slaves loaned by Lodis. Hummel rejects the offer, but Raid decides to act and face the rebels anyway. The Blue Knights fight Raid and his troop of Balmakans, and seeing the strength of the rebels, Raid decides to retreat to face them again at another time. They arrive at the place where the Balmakans were working, and Hugo gives Magnus 3 alternatives: free them directly, but risking many lives that would be in the middle of the battlefield, or choose not to involve them in the battle and move on to face the Western Army, or try to bypass the mines, where the majority were, and get to the city, where the minority of them were, and try to find another way to help them. They decide to go to the city and free them from the soldiers who were there. On the way to the city, they meet Liedel Klein, an archer from the Central Division who had been sent with her battalion to help the South against the rebels, but her battalion had been destroyed by the ogres, and she was the only survivor and sought revenge. Magnus explains to her that this was the fault of General Godeslas, who had succumbed to the infernal aura, and not the fault of the rebels. Liedel becomes suspicious and decides to join the group to find out the truth. The rebels arrive at the city where some Balmakans were, and after freeing them, one of them comments on a secret passage to the south that would reach the mines behind the guards. That way Balmakan slaves could be freed without a bloodbath. Magnus and his group follow the passage and find Aisha on the way, who was also trying to rescue them. Aisha has ended up separated from the other Zenobians and joins Magnus' group to help. The Balmakans from that region are freed, and Magnus lets them flee, choosing not to involve them in the war. Magnus and his allies march towards the Western Army headquarters, but on the way a messenger appears, saying that General Hummel would like to avoid conflict as he understands the reasons for the revolution and wants peace. They are interrupted when Raid arrives with more Balmakans and soldiers at his side to finish off Magnus this time. Even with this reinforcement, Raid and his knights are eventually defeated and killed. With this, the Balmakans he used as a weapon are freed, but one of them, named Vad Oroxlenka, wants revenge for the enslavement of his people and joins the army of the revolution to face his enemies. Destin and Saratin show up with urgent orders from Frederick. Due to the whole situation of the revolution getting out of control, and with the liberation of the Balmakan people, the Holy Lodi's Empire decided to intervene directly to resolve the situation, and their troops would arrive in the kingdom soon. Magnus should fight and take over the western headquarters as quickly as possible to boost the morale of the revolution's warriors. Saradin decides to join the Blue Knights along with her colleague Aisha to help with this task. Magnus is thoughtful about following orders to attack his friend who was looking for a deal, but marches his army to the west headquarters. On the way there they meet Shin Cocteau, a peace-loving hawkman who traveled the world looking for beautiful women. He decides to join the Blue Knights to help end the war so everyone can live peacefully and happily, and so the group continues their journey. Hummel talks to Mari in his quarters about being too weak to face the troops of the revolution and change the world. The prince is called and leaves the room. Zita appears to Mari and offers her a way to help the prince. The woman casts a spell on Mari, awakening an evil aura around her and gaining an evil power. Yumel and Ankaseth are called to an audience with Magnus, who has decided to refuse his official war orders and has chosen to make an alliance with the Western Division. Magnus and his father Ankaseth wait in the room when they are informed that Prince Yumel has been arrested by Baldwin and his Knights of Lodis on the charge of treason to the kingdom for the possibility of this deal with the revolution. Ankaseth then teams up with Magnus to go rescue the prince. They reach Baldwin, and while they are facing his knights, Baldwin flees with the prince to the central region. A few months pass, and with the control of the western region by the rebels, many soldiers of the kingdom join the revolution, which now possessed strength comparable to the central region. King Procus and his son Prince Amrius discover that the information to reach Bert's temple and gain the progenitor's power would be in the possession of Archbishop Odoron of the Eastern Orthodox Church. So the king sends Karakov Barths, one of his knights, to go to the archbishop and get information. As soon as Karakov leaves, Baldwin enters the king's room, accompanied by the troops of Lodis. Along them, the elite knights Tammuz Delville, Pruflas Watts, Amazroth Luden, Vapula Simberg, and Richard the Dragonheart, top commander of the Special Legion of Lodis and brother of Baldwin. Richard warns that due to the situation of the Revolutionary Army, the involvement of Zenobia, the liberation of the Balmacans, and mainly because of the appearance of demons and ogres, the kingdom of Palatinus was considered a pagan land, and from now on its autonomy had been revoked, being totally under the control and order of Lodis. These justifications were also a disguise for their true purpose here, to find the progenitor's power. Magnus talks with Frederick and Zivek to decide the next steps to take. Zivek wants to use the entire army to attack the central region as equals before the eastern region joins them, while Frederick wants to make an alliance with the central region to end the wars and live in peace. But they are informed that the troops from Lodis arrived in the kingdom and now controlled the central area of Palatinus, so a peace settlement was impossible. Lodis would probably advance to the east region first to control them, so they decide to go there to seek an alliance with the church against Lodis. The knight Karakov sent by the king arrives at the Eastern Orthodox Church and gives an underworld fruit to one of the warriors protecting the church. As soon as the warrior eats the fruit, he is overwhelmed by the infernal aura and becomes evil. Karakov uses this to accuse Archbishop Odoron of creating demons and having a pact with the underworld in the region and arrests him, taking his place and allowing him to search for information on the location of Bert's temple as ordered. Prince Amrius secretly goes there to get Karakov's information. On their way east, the Blue Knights encounter Pruflas and his legion of mighty Knights of Lodis. They enter combat, and after many efforts and sacrifices on the side of the rebels, Pruflas and his army retreat. On the way, they meet Mirdia O'Keefe, a childhood friend of Leia's who had been sent by her father to see how she was doing with the rebels. Mirdia asks Leia to visit her worried father as soon as possible, and that also north of the central region there were some supporters of the revolution who would like to help personally. Mirdia teams up with the Blue Knights to take care of Leia and help in the fight. Soon they are approached by the Knight Geel and some troops from the central region. Geel is defeated and says that the army of the East has made a pact with the underworld and is possessed by the demons. Magnus is apprehensive about this information, and they make their way to Eastern headquarters. Debonair, who was fighting some ogres and warriors, is seen on the way. Debonair joins the group along with his colleagues Saradin and Aisha. They also encounter Europe Rita, the captain of the Eastern Division who had been accused of heresy by the Central Division and was being persecuted. Europe joins the battalion to wipe out the monsters and bring peace to her region. Marching through the icy mountains, they come across several ogres and legions of undead ready to face them. Bist Laveret, who was trapped there, manages to break free and faces Magnus and his troop with his werewolf powers. He is defeated and killed. The rebellion finally reaches the eastern headquarters, where Amrius asks Karakov about the location of Bert's temple. Pruflas appears and takes the scroll with the information on the temple's location and leaves Karakov in charge of stopping the rebels. Magnus and his group confront Karakov, and after defeating him, he begs for his life in exchange for information about Lodi's goals of gaining infinite power and the location of Bert's temple. They save Archbishop Odoron and quickly march to the location informed by Karakov. Meanwhile, Prince Yumel talks to Mari and says that he wants to be strong and powerful so he can solve all situations. Baldwin appears and tries to manipulate him by saying that Yumel is one of the few who could have the ultimate power that was meant only for the progenitor's heirs, namely the royal family. But what Lodis didn't know is that only the child of the Covenant would be worthy of true power, not any member of the royal family. They then force Yumel to eat an underworld fruit so they can find and unleash the progenitor's power to Lodis. However, Yumel has Danika's soul inside him for being the son of the Covenant, so the fruit awakens the power of the Queen of the Underworld momentarily, causing all the knights and warriors that were close to be killed and the farthest to be possessed by the infernal aura. With her divine power and knowledge awakened, Yumel flees to Bert's temple. The Blue Knights arrive at Bert's temple and face several warriors possessed by the infernal aura and others who had turned ogres. Inside the temple, they find the warrior Pruflas in front of the Chaos Gate trying to break the seal alone, without success. Pruflas is ultimately defeated and killed when he tries to face Magnus. During this battle, Yumel appears and goes to the Chaos Gate, using her royal blood to open it. At this moment, the four knights of Danica appear, recognizing the Queen's soul, and teleport along with the prince. With the Chaos Gate officially opened, demons and ogres of all species and forms from the underworld begin to emerge from within it, advancing through the region and causing the group to retreat. To stop even more ogres from escaping, they advance against the legions of monsters and destroy the temple, deactivating the Chaos Gate inside. They return to the church. Archbishop Odoron agrees not to attack the revolutionaries, but he also couldn't send soldiers as they would have to take care of things in the region because of the monsters. A few weeks pass, and with the danger of ogres and demons in the regions, Frederick sends a letter to the central region of Palatinus proposing an end to the war, an alliance to fight them, and independence from Lodis, but receives no response. Ogres advance and use their powers to influence people to awaken the infernal aura much stronger than fruits, becoming ogres or possessed servants of the underworld. Yumel and his knights teleport to the main castle in the central region, spreading all their evil influence. Richard, Baldwin, and Tammuz, who were in the castle, are quickly surrounded by King Procus, Prince Amrius, and some knights of Lodis, all possessed by the infernal aura. In the midst of the fighting, they manage to escape from there. With no response from the peace agreement, Frederick decides to invade the central region to end the War of Revolution, defeat Lodis, and prevent them from using the powers of darkness in any way. Magnus and his warriors marched towards the central region, passing a battlefield where demons and ogres faced several legions of Lodis knights. They end up finding Destin and Gilbert cornered in a field by enemies. After helping the Zenobians, Destin comments that there must be a traitor within the rebellion, as they had been accurately ambushed and their warriors all killed. The two decide to accompany Magnus and the rest of the Zenobians towards the capital. On the way, they find who the traitor was. Zivek and his troop decided to ally themselves with the king and prince upon learning that they had acquired the ultimate power so they could easily face Lodi's. Zivek is defeated and the Blue Knights move on, meeting up with Prince Amrius for a life-or-death combat. The prince uses his power received with the infernal aura and his royal blood to conjure ogres and face the protagonists. Despite being very powerful, Magnus and his group manage to subdue the monsters and finally defeat the prince. The chaos wrought by the emergence of the ogres and their evil influence is causing the common people to become dominated by evil, so Magnus decides to help the villages of innocent civilians get rid of the monsters before marching to the capital. Arriving in one of the villages, they find the Knight of Lodi's Amazeroth totally insane, dominated by the infernal aura and going to attack. Amazeroth is defeated and they move on to the city where Leia's father, Count Silvus, ruled. But as they advance through the city, more and more dark creatures and undead they find and fight. Leia is worried that her father would also have succumbed to the infernal aura and that she would have to face him. Arriving at the castle, they find a lich running the place. Leia defeats the lich's revenge for killing her father. But the lich explains that, in fact, the man had taken his own life so as not to succumb to the infernal aura and become a servant of darkness, remaining an honorable man until the end. Despite the loss, the group continues to defeat the monsters in the region, who say they won't be able to stop the resurrection of the underworld queen Danica, who is already starting there in the capital. They discover that Yumel plans to use his powers to destroy the rebellion and Lodi's and create a new world where he will rule over men and demons. With this information, they finally start marching to the capital of the central region to stop this. Along the way, they encounter ogres, Midland Knights, and Lodi's Knights, all possessed by the infernal aura. They face off against the warriors and also Vapula, the elite warrior of Lodi's who had been corrupted due to his desire to be stronger than everyone else. Magnus and his group manage to defeat him and finally reach the capital. There, they march through the legions of warriors and demons commanded by Yumel until they face two of Danica's knights. Magnus and his group manage to defeat the skilled knights with mystical powers. Seeing the armies of the rebellion approaching the castle, King Procus becomes desperate and orders Yumel to perform the progenitor's forbidden magic to end everything and everyone. Yumel grows impatient with the king giving him orders and kills his father using his powers. Magnus finds Yumel. The prince says he was waiting for him, as he had acquired supreme power and would rule over men and demons. Only he, Magnus, was worthy to be his knight, as he promised when they were little. Magnus rejects it, as he knows the real Yumel would never use war and violence to create a kingdom. Yumel is furious at his friend disappointing him and vows to kill him for it. So begins the battle between the protagonists and Yumel and her two knights of Danica. The Blue Knights defeat Danica's knights and Magnus manages to attack Yumel. Yumel explains that he is Danica's reincarnation and that he wanted to use his powers and strength to bring peace to the world. Magnus reminds him that he is not like that, as he wanted to bring peace without violence. Magnus reaches out to his friend saying it's not too late to start over. At this moment, Mari appears, and seeing that situation, she is freaked out about the possibility of Magnus stealing Yumel from her. Mari takes a sword and kills Yumel in despair. Zeta appears and is furious that Mari has been unable to control her emotions, and now with Yumel's death there is no way for Danica to resurrect in that body. There was only one way to bring Danica back, which was to break the seal on the second Chaos Gate in that region. Zeta teleports with Mari out of the castle, and Magnus, after mourning his friend's death, takes his battalion and heads towards the Chaos Gate to prevent the Queen of the Underworld from returning and starting another ogre battle. Zeta and Mari meet with the Knights of Lodi's Tammuz, Richard, and Baldwin. With Yumel dead, they make a deal that Zeta would use Mari to resurrect Danica, and they would make a deal with the demigod to gain power, just like the progenitor did a long time ago. Zeta and Mari move on, and the Knights of Lodi stay behind to delay the revolutionary army. The Blue Knights first face Tammuz, who despite being experienced is not able to stop them and is defeated. They go ahead and face Baldwin, allied with some ogres who sought to ensure the resurrection of their queen. Finding himself unable to match his enemy's strength, Baldwin retreats to where Richard is. Richard calls him incompetent for being unable to defeat the rebels and avenge Tammuz's death, ordering Baldwin to go to the Chaos Gate so he would take care of the enemies. Magnus and Richard engage in a sword fight while the rest of the armies clash. Seeing that he will be defeated, Richard retreats and runs to the ruins to get the divine power. On the way, he meets Baldwin and humiliates him again. Baldwin can't stand being humiliated by his brother anymore and kills him with his sword, heading to the Chaos Gate to get the power only for himself. Magnus finds him and starts fighting Baldwin, while Zeta and Mari arrive at the Chaos Gate. Zeta pulls out the sword with Yumel's blood and asks Mari to break the seal, as underworld creatures cannot do that. Mari refuses. Zeta then explains that it was Mari's destiny to do this, that all of her feelings and goals towards Yumel were already planned by her father when she was born. Mari goes into despair and kills Zeta. Trying to reunite with her lover, Mari uses the sword on the Chaos Gate, breaking the seal by accident just as Magnus and Baldwin arrive at the scene. Danica emerges from the portal. Baldwin takes the opportunity and jumps ahead, killing Mari with his sword and asking the goddess for power. Danica sees Mari's situation and knocks out Baldwin. The goddess recognizes Magnus through Yumel's memories and tells her tragic story with the underworld. At this point, Baldwin's hatred and rage begins to affect Danica, awakening her infernal aura and transforming her into the queen of the underworld, ready to destroy and rule the world. Magnus and all his allies must unite to face the divine monstrosity that was before them. After a fierce battle, with many casualties on the rebel side, they finally manage to find a weak spot in the goddess, and Magnus delivers the fatal blow. Danica manages to suppress her infernal aura again and returns to her normal state. Danica thanks Magnus for being able to stop his evil side, and explains that humans and ogres are equal in origin, the only difference being that ogres are ruled by hatred. Therefore, they should be careful in this world, as an ogre battle could be initiated not only by the forces of the underworld, but by men with a lot of hatred fighting each other. The entire plan for Danika's resurrection had been planned by Rashidi, and because of people like that, another ogre battle couldn't be avoided in the future. With those words, Danika disappears, finally ending the threat of the Underworld Queen's resurrection. Immediately after the final battle, Magnus and his warriors return to the main castle to recover from their wounds and plan their next steps. Baldwin wakes up again and swears revenge on Palatinus. At this moment, a baby is born from Mari's body. Mari was pregnant with Yumal's child, and as Zeta had injected Rashidi's energy into her body, Rashidi's soul passed into the baby, and now the mighty sage had been reborn in the body of a god. Rashidi, now fully conscious, sees Baldwin and decides to test his new powers, killing the Knight of Lodi's and then disappearing. Six months later. Epilogue. At the main region castle, Destin tells Magnus that he and the other Zenobians would return to their homeland to inform King Tristan of the events of Palatinus and prepare for an all-out war against Lodi's. Frederick Raskin, the leader of the revolution, becomes the king of Palatinus, ruling for the people and only by the people's will. Because of this, he became known as King Frederick the Benevolent. Magnus becomes general of Palatinus' troops along with the rest of the Blue Knights, helping to maintain order and rebuild the kingdom in a brief moment of peace. A few years later, barbarian tribes from the distant eastern continent invade, forcing Magnus to rejoin the Blue Knights to fight them. In this event, King Frederick ends up being killed. With success in preventing the barbarian invasion, Magnus, as Frederick's right-hand man, assumes the post of king and maintains the same policies as his predecessor. Magnus Gallant becomes known as the Palladian King and has a son, Prince Aeneas Gallant, who will follow his father's footsteps in the future. And so ends the story of the game Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber. What did you think of this game when you first played it? Write in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, give a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot here on YouTube. Thank you all and see you soon with more videos from the Ogre Battle Saga.